Hello, and welcome to Recreating Automation Use Cases in Pipelines. I'm Leanne Snowick, and I'm an implementation consultant at Quickbase. Prior to working at Quickbase, I was a customer for the past 14 years. And I'm here today because I've been transitioning off of automations into pipelines over the past year. And I'm really excited to show you guys how you can do that.
Hey everyone, my name is Nate Underwood. I am also an implementation consultant here at Quickbase. Some of you might recognize my name or recognize me. I was a customer success manager for over 3 years before transitioning into this role earlier this year. So I may have been your customer success manager at one point or another. Much like Leanne, I was a user of automations when I first started working at Quickbase. But as soon as I was able to, I got my hands onto pipelines, and I've really been kind of taking off with pipelines ever since. So excited to show you some of the things that you can do with pipelines today. So before we get started, I just want to point out that there is an application on the Exchange that you can feel free to download if you wish. So if you go to the My Apps page in Quickbase and you select Explore Sample Apps on the right-hand side, go ahead and click that. And once you do, you'll be brought to a search screen where you can go ahead and search for the name of our application, which is Empower 2021, Recreating Automation Use Cases and Pipelines. One thing I do want to point out is that if you do decide to download this application, don't feel like you have to build along with us. That's really hard to do in a virtual session like this, especially with the amount of people that we have on today. So feel free to follow along, and really you can use the app later on to practice building the pipelines that we're going to cover today. And we'll provide plenty of resources to you at the end of the session. And you can always come back and watch the recording of this session as well at any time. So the idea being, once the training concludes, you'll be able to definitely be hands-on with these pipelines. All right, so some of the key takeaways for today's session is we want to talk about some of the most common automation use cases that we've identified by speaking to a lot of Quickbase builders, both internally here at Quickbase as well as our customers. And we want to take a close look at those automations and then recreate them in pipelines. We want to learn how to map out and build those pipelines and achieve a lot of the same things that we can do with automations, and then actually beyond that as well. And so by the end of the session, we're hoping that we really increase your knowledge and understanding of pipelines, and really sharpen that Quickbase tool set that you have.
So as you'll see during our presentation, there are some benefits to using pipelines in these particular use cases that we'll show you. But overall, the possibilities of automated workflows really increases exponentially when you move from automations to pipelines as the primary workflow tool. So some of the ways that you can see these benefits are by connecting with external platforms. You'll also be able to expand your scalability of Quickbase, and you'll see that today how we can add on to applications without disrupting their architecture as we do more workflow design. You'll also be able to do data transformation and utilize workflow tools directly within pipelines. So things like scheduling and utilizing Jinja to do data transformation instead of creating new fields in Quickbase, just so that you can change data and the way that it looks. And then finally, sophisticated automated workflows with things like nested searching and if-else statements, and utilizing data across different applications and unrelated tables and data sets. It's really unlimited the possibilities of things that you can do with your data in Quickbase and in other tools. So during the presentation today, what we're going to do is we're going to go through these different use cases, which is cascading deletes, capturing previous value, and creating a missing parent when a child is added.
Awesome. And I'm actually going to start things off today by jumping into that first one, Cascading Deletes. So Cascading Deletes is a really powerful method for deleting records in Quickbase. And deleting records in Quickbase in bulk can be actually really challenging. First, you have to identify all the records you want, and then you have to go and delete those. And building reports can certainly help with that. But when you have relationships between tables, especially when you have grandparent records and parent records and grandchild records, it can be really hard to identify all the records that might be related to one another and then delete all those. So one of the things that automations has been really powerful and helpful with is setting up cascading deletes. So that way you can, not worry about building reports, not worrying about finding all of those records that might be related to each other that you want to delete. Automations can actually do that for you. Pipelines can also do this. So let's take a look at a basic use case here for setting up cascading deletes. So you can see here on the left-hand side, I have three tables: a customers tables, a projects tables, and a task table. And really what I want to do is when I delete a customer record, I want to go ahead and have my pipeline find all the related projects and also delete those. And then not only that, but we want to take it a step further, and we want to find all the tasks that are related to all those projects, and we also want to delete those as well. So one of the requirements that we'll have to do here is make sure that our users do have the ability to delete in our triggering table, which in this case is going to be the customers table. And when they do that, it'll go ahead and search for the records that are related to it, the projects and the tasks, and go ahead and delete those as well. So we can do this in automations today, as I mentioned. Here's how you would set up the trigger of an automation. And I'm not going to spend too much time on the automations today, as the focus really is pipelines. But our trigger is simply when a record is deleted in the customers table. What do we want to do? We want to go ahead and delete those related projects in the projects table. And then we want to go and delete the related tasks to those projects in the tasks table. So pretty basic setup with automations. And if we take a look at how we want to build this out in pipelines, here is a diagram showing how to do that. So at the top of the screen here, you can see we have our customer record, right? That's step A. When that's also going to be our trigger in this example. So when our customer record is deleted, we're going to go ahead and query our projects table. We're going to search that table in step B, and we're going to try to find all the projects that are related to that specific customer that was deleted. When those projects are found, for each one that we find, we're going to go ahead and with step D here, we're going to delete our projects. And then from there, we're going to search for related tasks and delete those tasks as well once we find those. So there's two queries in this setup that we're going to use to then delete the records that we find in each table. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at this with a demo right within Quickbase. All right, so I mentioned the app in the beginning of the session here that you can get out of the Exchange. So this is the application. Here we are on the home page, and I'm just going to very quickly give you a little overview of the application. On the home page, you can see here we have a setup button, which will bring you right over to the setup table. One of the things that is optional during this session or after the session is if you want to actually recreate these pipelines yourself, you can certainly do that by reviewing what we're going to cover today and building out those pipelines manually. However, if you'd like to kind of skip that step and just quickly set those up, we do have a setup table that will allow you to very quickly build out these pipelines simply by doing an import of what we call a YAML, which will actually build those pipelines for you. And in the setup table, you're just going to enter your account slug. And then there's also instructions there on how to actually import the YAML and get that squared away for you. Also on the home screen here, you can see we have a number of resources. We're going to actually take a closer look at those towards the end. And then the rest of the application is really focused on our use cases. So in my first use case here, Cascading Deletes, we're going to take a close look at the customers table, the projects table, and the tasks table. So this is just as I showed in my diagram, set up where our customers table is the parent to projects, and then projects is the parent to tasks. So all three of these are related. And before we jump into the pipeline, I'm actually going to go ahead and show you the pipeline in action. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and find one of my customer records that I want to delete. And before I delete it, I'm just going to go ahead and point out that this customer record has a number of projects related to it. And furthermore, if I go into one of these projects, we're going to see, let me go back there and choose one that has a bit more information. We're going to see that I believe it's this one. Yes, we're going to see that there are also many tasks related to this project. So if I were to do this manually and delete all the customer record, as well as all the projects that it had, as well as all the tasks that it had, that'd take me some time. So instead, what I'm going to do is going to just go to the customer table here, go back to that customer record, and I'm just going to delete this, and I'm going to let the pipeline do all the work here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this customer. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. All right, so that customer record is now deleted. And if I go to the projects table now, what we're going to find is that there are going to be no projects related to that customer. So if I do a quick scroll through here, you can see that there are no projects that are actually related to the customer there. And same with the tasks table. If you remember that task that I clicked, or the project I clicked on, was the steel framing. So you'll notice that all of that was actually deleted right out. So that saved me quite a bit of time. So let's take a closer look at how we can actually go ahead and build out this pipeline. So I've gone to the My Pipelines page here. I'm in the new view, which I filtered on the 3 pipelines that I'm going to show today. So the first pipeline that actually just ran is this Cascading Delete pipeline. So I'm going to go ahead and click into this, and whoops, we actually want to click into the pencil and go into edit here. And so I already have this pipeline built out, just like I diagrammed in my PowerPoint. So the first thing we're going to do is, on the right-hand side, we're going to go ahead and click into our Quickbase channel, and we can see we have a few categories here. We're going to focus just on the records for today. So I've already built out my pipeline, so I'm not going to be able to select a trigger here, but really all I did was drag over that record deleted trigger onto my canvas. And I've already authenticated my pipelines to my Quickbase account, so I've gone ahead and selected the account there that I want to use. And then the first thing I do is I define the table where this is all occurring and triggering from, which of course in this case is the customers table within my application. In the next field, I don't actually need to define anything here because I'm not worried about using any of the fields that are in my customers table for later use. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that blank. If I wanted to build out a query to say, you know what, I only want this to trigger sometimes when it meets certain conditions, I could go ahead and build out a condition here. But in this case, every time I delete a customer, I'm going to want to delete those projects and those tasks. So that is my trigger. I'm going to go ahead and collapse that. Next is our step B here. So our second step, I went ahead and dragged over my search records. If I expand that, I can see the table that I'm searching. So in this case, I am searching my projects table. And this time I am going to define fields for later use. So I'm going to go ahead and say, when I'm searching my projects table, what do I most care about? I care about the related customer field because that's going to identify the customer that actually triggered this pipeline to run. So I've gone ahead and defined my related customer. And this time I am going to use a query. So I am going to put some conditions in place. I want the pipeline to only find the projects that are related to that customer record I deleted. So in this case, I choose related customer and I say equals, and I drag over my customer ID from step A here. So this is just saying, make sure we go and only find those projects that are related to the customer that triggered the record. And then for each one that we find, what are we going to do? So for each one, we're going to go ahead and take some actions. The first thing we're going to do is go ahead and delete that record. So again, we're going to use our action on the right-hand side, drag that over, and then we're going to define what do we want to actually delete. In this case, it's all the records we found in step B during our search of the projects table. So not much to define here. We're just Quickbase is actually going to default this value in for us. So we'll go ahead and leave that as is. Next, we're not done yet. We actually want to go ahead and delete those tasks that are related to that project. So in this case, we're going to search again. So we're using a second query that we've dragged over, but this time we're not going to be searching the projects table. Instead, we're going to be searching the tasks table. So we'll define our task table here. And just like we did in the previous search, we're going to define the fields that we want. In this case, when we're thinking about those tasks, we're really only concerned with the tasks that are related to that all the projects that were just deleted. So we'll go ahead and define our related projects and build out essentially what's the same query. The big difference here is that we're now defining related project. And this time we're going to drag over the record ID from step B, our second step. So that way it's saying, hey, we're only going to find the tasks that are related to those projects that were just deleted. And very similar to what we did just a moment ago, for each task we find, we're then going to delete that record. And again, that just would be dragging over our delete action onto the screen here under our do, and making sure that the default of step D, which is our search here, where we're searching the tasks, is defined, which it should be. So at this point, our pipeline is complete. And the only thing left to do is make sure we give it a good descriptive name, which I've already done here, and then just make sure that we turn it on. All right. So that's the first use case. I'm going to jump back now to my PowerPoint here. And let's take a look at our second use case. So remember, we're really trying to find some use cases here that are pretty heavily used by our clients with automation. So one of the big ones is the ability to capture old values and new values. So capturing previous value, as many people call it, means when a record is updated and a field changes. Well, we might have certain use cases where we want to actually identify the field that changed, but we want to know what the old value of that field was, and we want to know what the new value of that field was, and we want to use those later on in our pipeline somewhere. So in a pretty common use case for this feature is when a record changes in a table, we want to actually log that as a change log. Similar to like Quickbase audit logs, except here we're actually surfacing up that data right within our application, so end users can actually leverage it. So what we're going to do here is we already have our projects table, which I just showed you, but we're also going to build out our project change log table. So this is a table that's specifically going to be used to capture the changes that occur with our projects. So the use case here specifically is that when any of the following three fields change in a project, so my status changes in a product, my start date, my end date, any of those fields change, we want to actually go ahead and capture what the old status was and also what the new status was. But we want to take a little step further and also say, well, who's the person that made that change? I want to make sure I know that. Also, when did they make that change? So that way, when I look at a project, I can see a complete list of all the changes that occurred with that project, who did it, when it happened. That way I won't have to go digging anywhere. I won't have to follow up with anyone. I'll just have a complete log of all the historical events to that project in one place. So that is something that we can do in pipelines, and your end users will just need the ability to modify those project records to make this occur. Great, so let's go ahead and look at how we set up the automation here. So the trigger, anytime a record is modified, and as you can see here, I'm also calling out those specific 3 fields as well. So when one of those changes, do what? Do this. We want to actually copy the value from our triggering record, our project. And as you're probably familiar with, automations would allow you to say, yeah, I want the old value from my status. I want the new value from my status and the other fields as well. And so we'll define all those there and build out all of that. So in pipelines, this is going to be a 2-step pipeline. The first step, our trigger, is going to be a project is modified. And of course, my conditions on this are really identifying those 3 fields we've talked about: status, start date, and end date, right? So that's my trigger. When that triggers, we're going to go ahead and create a record in our project changelog table. And we're going to capture those previous values, and we're going to capture those new values for those fields, as well as who made that change in the project table and when they did it. So let's jump back to our application again. So we've already seen we have the projects table. We're familiar with that. Here's our project changelog table, and this is just going to have a few examples of what this will actually look like. So we can see our customer, our previous status, our new status, as well as for our date fields, both previous and new, who made the change, as well as the date and the time that the change occurred. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to capture those changes when things change with our projects. So if I go into a project, and this time I'm going to go ahead and we'll choose this specific project, and I'm going to make a couple of changes on it. So we'll go ahead and say that this project is going to go on hold. And because it's going on hold, we actually are going to push out that start date a bit. All right, and we're also going to say our end date is now defined, and we're going to say by the end of the year. Sorry, end date. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And Quickbase is quickly going to load. In the background, I have my pipeline running. And when I scroll down, we can see that the change that I just made is captured here. So we can see that this particular project was in progress, is now on hold. We can see our start date actually came in a bit, and then our end date is now defined here. So that's the purpose of one of those change logs, and all of that was done using pipelines. So if we actually take a close look at our pipeline here, I'm going to go back to my pipelines. I'm going to quickly filter on just the 3 we need for today. We can see we have my project change logs. I'm going to go ahead and jump into that. And this is a fairly simple pipeline. There's one kind of tricky part that I'll walk you through. So our first step here, and of course this is already built out, I've already authenticated to Quickbase. Our first step is defining that trigger, which again, I'm just going to go over to the records, and I'm going to drag over a record has been updated, okay? And once I've done that, I'm going to say, do I want to trigger this on any field? And in this case, we know we're only really concerned with 3 fields, and I've defined those here. And then we're also going to define the fields that we want to use later on in our pipeline. So in this case, we have status, we have start date, and we have end date. So I've defined those. We're not going to add any condition. It's simply if these fields change, then we want the pipeline to run. Nothing to add as far as conditions go. So I'll go ahead and collapse that. All right, so once that change happens in our projects table, what's next? We want to actually create a record. So we're going to drag over our create record action here as step B. And we're going to say we're going to create a record in the project changelog table. So that's what I've defined in our table here. And then in that table, when I'm creating a new record, what fields do I really want to populate here? And that's what the select fields to specify values. That's just the fields where we want to write data into those fields when we create that new record. So I've gone ahead and identified quite a few fields here. And you can remember we're capturing the old value, the new value. So we have things like the previous start date as well as the current start date as well. So once we've defined our fields here and we click outside of that box, we're going to notice that all of these fields then populate in this step. And it's a pretty simple process of writing values into these fields. What I can do is using step A on the right-hand side here, these are all my data points for my trigger. I can simply drag over these values into these fields, right? So I've already done that. And when I drop that in there, this is what it looks like. So I've gone ahead and I've already built this out. So as you can see, I have my status. I want to relate it to my trigger. So I've dragged over my record ID into the related projects field. I simply am just kind of matching at this point, pulling over my end date. But you'll notice when I get to the previous value fields, they're a bit different. So when I actually pull over a value here, and I'm going to just demonstrate this so you can see it. Let me see here. There we go. Okay. When I pull that value over, it's coming over just as it normally would. But what I want to do is I want to tell Quickbase, hey, you know, I want to actually get the previous value before the change was made. And to do that, we're going to use something called Jinja. So Jinja is essentially Pipelines formula language. So if you're familiar with Quickbase formulas, you can think about it in a very similar way where you have these different functions that you can apply to it. So in this case, we're going to apply a little bit of Jinja here. And if you're looking at my other previous fields here, you'll notice that I have this part inserted in. So I'm going to do that here too. So I'm going to do the money sign and just type prev period. And that's simply it. And that's going to let pipelines know that because the value in this field has actually changed, I want to get the old value and not the new value. So just applying that small little snippet of Jinja, this is actually a filter, I believe, that's going to go ahead and grab that previous value. So I've gone ahead and done that for my previous fields here. And then what else I've done here is I want to capture who actually made that change. So I'm simply going to my triggering record again. We have the last modified by data, and I'm simply just pulling over the email here. And I'm doing the same for the date modified, the date changed. I'm pulling over the date updated at right into that field. So that way I can capture when the change actually occurred. And that's simply it. So what I'm going to do now, the only thing left to do, give it a good name, which I've done, and then turn that pipeline on. Once I turn the pipeline on, this screen is always going to present itself, which would allow me to see this pipeline run once it's triggered. I'm actually, for the sake of this demo, I'm actually going to go ahead and turn this pipeline off. I'm going to jump back to my pipelines here. And again, I'm going to just filter on the ones for this session. I'm going to actually turn this one off too. And I'm going to turn this last pipeline on. And before I tell you why, let's jump back to our presentation here. So what if we want to combine both those use cases that I just highlighted? So we have Cascading Delete, right? And then we also have logging changes to the projects table. Well, what if I want to know in my change logs table when something's been deleted? So a project was deleted. I want to have a record of that. I want to know who did it. I want to know when they did it. I want to know, a number of the things about the project that don't exist in the project table anymore. That's something we can do with pipelines, right? So if I were to try to go into either of the automations that I showed you those screenshots of and try to implement that workflow where I'm actually adding in a step to log the change of a deleted value, you can't actually do it. You would have to do a number of things to work around that to try to get the outcome that I'm looking for here. The good thing is pipelines can do that. So pipelines doesn't need to have the triggering record, pipelines doesn't need to have the record that we're trying to capture values from be the triggering record like automations does. So when our project is deleted, we want to capture that in our change log. And so how are we going to do that? So if you remember our cascading delete pipeline, it looked just like this. There's one thing that we're going to make a tweak of, and we're going to insert a step right here. So we're going to add a project changelog record into our pipeline here. So let's go ahead and quickly look at that. Since it is very similar to our existing Cascade Delete, I'm going to kind of skip through and just show you the important part here. All right, so nothing changes with our trigger. A record was deleted in our customers table. So this is, again, starting at the customer level. We're going to go ahead and search our projects table, right? We're going to find all the related projects that we want to delete. Instead of just deleting them right away, we're actually going to insert this step. So it's step C here that we're most concerned with. This is the new step that we've inserted into that cascading deletes pipeline. So we're going to define our projects log table, change log table here. And then we're, again, just like we did before, we're going to specify values for later use here. And when we create that record in the project change log table, what do we want in these fields? So in this case, I know that, this is going to be a delete. This is a cascading delete pipeline. So the status is now deleted of my project. So I've gone ahead and just hard coded, typed that right into my status field. That's my new status. So it possibly the previous status could have, been, in progress or on hold, but my new status is now deleted. The rest of the fields are pretty self-explanatory. So datetime changed, again, who actually deleted the record, dragged that over, our end date, our start date. One thing you'll notice, I'm not using previous here. And the reason I'm not using previous is because the record is not actually being updated. Therefore, we don't actually need the previous value. We just need the value that it was when it was deleted. And that's where you run into an issue with automations, because the project that's being deleted when a customer is deleted, we're not able to gather any information out of that project when it's deleted. Thankfully, with pipelines, we can do that. So we don't actually need to grab the Jinja with the money sign prev. We don't need that. We're just, because it's not updating. So we're just putting in the regular values here. Because my relationship of my project to my project changelog table, I'm using a lookup field to identify the project name. I've actually gone ahead and created just a text field so I can actually go back and see, all right, well, a project doesn't exist anymore, so I can't reference it in my lookup field. So I'm actually just gonna go ahead and write into a field now. So this is one of the key differences I did here. I just dragged in 2 values into this field. So I know my customer name, I know my project name that was deleted. And then again, just like we did previously, we can log who actually did that change. So this pipeline is all set to run. There was other steps after that, but they were all the same as the cascading deletes. So we'll go back to our customers table here. And I know that one of these customers here has quite a few projects. So let's pull that up. So we can see all of these projects and we want to delete them. We want to delete this customer. We want to know that all these projects were deleted in our project changelog table. So I'll go ahead and delete this customer. Yes. And because I have it up, I'm just going to switch back real quick. We're actually going to be able to watch the pipeline run. So there's my customer record getting deleted. There you can see that customer name. All those projects that customer had, we identified those. And as we scroll down here, we can see we're creating all these records. That's in our project changelog table. And then we're also deleting those projects as well. We should see another search here, searching all of our tasks. We found a bunch of tasks related to all those projects. We're going to go ahead and delete all those as well. So a lot just happened in that pipeline. There was a lot of records, but it ran pretty quickly. So that customer's gone, the projects are gone, tasks are gone. But if we come to our project changelog table, we should see that all of these projects have now been deleted. You can see our previous status, our previous dates, if there were any. If I actually jump into one of these, we'll also see the customer as well as the project that actually was deleted. Also who did it and when they did it, which was me in this case. Great, so that concludes my portion of this session. So hopefully you got a lot out of that. You saw what you could kind of do with pipelines that you're not actually able to do with automations. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Leanne.
Thank you so much, Nate. Now I'm going to talk through how to create missing parent when a child is added. And I think for this particular use case, it helps to really have a real life scenario to describe. And I've actually encountered this with multiple customers. So the use case we're going to go through today is that we're going to be using the same application that Nate showed us. And what we want to do is we want to allow our customers to submit a project to us. But the trick here is that they're not users in our application, and we don't particularly want them to see other lists of customers that we work with. So we want to avoid giving them the typical drop-down menu that comes with a related table. So how can we accomplish this? We're going to look at, again, the automations version and the pipelines, but the key use case here is that we're going to have a project submission form that has data entry fields for customer identification. And today we're going to use a customer ID number that has already been provided to our customers. For your own use cases, I've seen people use things like a university ID or an employee ID that helps just a unique identifier that the person entering the data already knows. We also want to search the customer table for the existing customer. And if they do not yet exist, we want to add them to the customer table. And finally, we want to make sure that all our projects are related to a customer. Okay, so how can we do this with automations today? Automation number one, as you can see on here, is to copy the customer ID into the related field. And then we would have to do a second automation, which would add a new record to that customer table and make sure that those are related. So as you can probably tell, this is a little bit of a clunky process, and I'm just going to outline some of the limitations here. First, as you just heard me say, there is a two-step process that we need to manage, and whoever comes after us as builders in this application also needs to know that they need to manage a two-step process. A second real hard limitation on adapting this to an application that already exists, that potentially the customers table has many different relationships at this point, is that you'll need to create a custom master key in order for this automation process to work. Meaning that the users, or the non-users in this case, that are going to be entering their ID number, they don't necessarily have the Quickbase record ID number that's automatically generated. So what we need to do is we need to give them the ability to enter in their ID number and for Quickbase to know that that's the unique key on the table. So that brings us to the missing ability of being able to search. If we did have search functionality in automations, we would be able to simply search any field like a customer identifier, even if it wasn't the key field. But for automations, we can't do that. We also don't have the ability to do any if-then statements. And finally, we are going to be missing a piece of the process here where we can't do any multi-record imports. So the good news is with pipelines, and we can see in this build setup that I have here, is that we are able to accomplish this all with one single workflow. And without having to change our architecture, which is really important. So before I get started in building in pipelines, especially with some nested features, I really like to write it out first so that we really understand the logic that we're going to implement. So here you can see our first step, step A, which is our trigger, is to create, when a new project is created, that's going to kick off this entire workflow. We then want to, in step B, search for our customers. And here's where we kind of fork in the road. If there is a customer found on the right-hand side, you can see we're simply going to update the project record with that related customer. But if there is no customer record that's found, we're going to have the pipeline do two steps. Create a new customer record, and then we want to update the project record with that new customer record. So let's jump into the pipelines demo now and see how we can accomplish that using the application that we all have. Okay, so now you can see that we're back in our Empower 2021 application. And what I've done here is I've just opened up an add project form where you can see we have our customer name as a data entry field and the customer ID number as a data entry field. So we're going to go look at how the pipeline is set up, and we'll come back in here and test it when we're done. So looking at the pipeline that we've set up here, apply customer record to project. We have our trigger record, as we talked about, called record created, and that's going to be a record created in our projects table. That's what kicks off our pipeline. Now, what you have here is our fields for subsequent steps. We're going to be pulling in our related customer, so that's our record ID number, our customer ID number, which is our data entry field, and our customer name data entry field. Now, you may not think that you need this last field, but if we're going to create a new customer record, that's going to be a piece of information that we're going to need. So remember, we enter these, and then they're going to be getting that information from Quickbase as it kicks off, and we'll be able to use those fields all down the rest of the pipeline. Okay, so what's our next step? Our next step is that we want to search records, and we want to search in the customers table. So that's where we're searching in here, and we're looking for the customer ID field. Because again, that's the one that our customer knows and has entered. So what we're going to put at the bottom is we're going to say, okay, so our customer ID in the customers table equals our customer ID that was data entry in our step A, which is on the project record. And as Nate showed you, all I did here was really bring that field right over into our criteria section. Now, the next step in our search is going to be for each to update the records. And I just want to let you guys know that typically Quickbase will create, when you have a search record step, it'll create a loop for you, which brings up this for each and do section. But if you don't see that, you can always click insert loop and it will add those features for you. So what we're saying here is we're saying after we search these records, and for each record that we find in that step, we're then going to update a record. And which record are we going to update? We have a couple options here. We could either do the project record from step A, or we could update the record that we just found in step B. We want to update the project record. So we only need to update one field here, and that is going to be the ID number of the related customer. This will complete our relationship here so that whenever we go into the project, we can click up into the customer, or if we go to the customer record, we could see all the related projects that they have. Okay, but again, we have to go to that fork in the road. So what if when we're searching these records, we don't find any customer records? Well, very easily, what I did was I pressed a button like this before that had insert a condition. And what comes up from that is an if else statement, or if then in pipelines terminology. So what I did is I added criteria here that says if the list of records is empty, then we're going to do something else. And that something else is we're going to go ahead and create a record in our customers table. And this is where we want to use that step A, name, and the ID number. So this creates a brand new record for us. And we don't even have to worry about the related customer ID because Quickbase creates that record ID automatically for us. Okay, so the final step in our pipeline here is that we want to update that initial record. And again, Pipelines gives us the option, what record do you want to update? So it's really useful and quick to work on. But right now, we just want to do it with our newly created customer that was created in step D. And as you can see here, this is really important to understand where all this information is coming from. When we have that indicator at front, it's telling us it's coming from the different step. Because as you can see, in step D, there's an ID number, but there's also an ID number in all of these other steps as well. So it's really important to pay attention to that letter that's in front of your fields. Okay, so that is everything in our pipeline. So we want to make sure that it's on, and we're going to hit sync just so that we can see it running as we did when Nate gave his demonstration. So in here, I'm going to come in and I'm just going to enter a customer name. And since I work at Quickbase, that's what I'm going to pick. And my customer number is 4002. So new project name is, since we're in a construction app, I'm going to do my status not started, and I'll just pick a few start and end dates. Okay, so Quickbase is not a customer right now. And so what we're going to see is what happens when that comes through. So as you can see on my view form, I have different fields listed here. This is my related customer with the related customer name and my related customer ID number. So those are not the data entry fields. So we can come over and we can see, oh, my pipeline saw that a new record, a project record was created. It grabbed that information and it said in step B, where it was searching the customers table, it didn't find any customer records. So then it branched off with my if condition to create a new record and then update that record. So all we have to do, since it ran successfully, is to refresh the page. And you can see here that now I have a related customer in there. And I can click into that customer and I can see my related projects. So now we'll just jump back to the PowerPoint and finish up our presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Leanne. So to wrap up here, just to recap our key takeaways. So we really wanted to identify some of those common automation use cases. So we highlighted 3. However, there's plenty of others out there. And I'm happy to say that you can really create any automation with pipelines. So we just decided to pick some of the more heavily used ones. But the great thing about pipelines is you can, certainly do much more. And then, to even level it up a bit, we can say you can do those things outside of Quickbase now with pipelines and stretch it across platforms that you might be using as well. So hopefully by the end of the session, you learned how to map out and build those pipelines for yourself. And certainly, use that application as well as the YAML that we provided to build out your own pipelines and test those out. And hopefully, again, you've really increased your Quickbase skill set here. So before we conclude, I just want to touch on some of the pipeline resources that are available. So first, of course, is Empower, right? So you've just attended this session. There's plenty of other pipeline specific sessions this year that we're happy to bring. From more of the beginner to super advanced. You'll find everything under the connections category within the Empower website. So definitely take a look, and I'm sure you're going to find tons of value in some of the upcoming sessions. Also, take a look back at last year. Both Leanne and I did additional sessions last year. You can see a couple on the right-hand side here. You have things as advanced as using pipelines in the RESTful API, all the way back to building your first pipeline, something that I did. And we did mention Jinja today. So Jinja, as I mentioned earlier, is a pipelines formula language. We'll have sessions specifically on Jinja too. So if you're really looking to do more with pipelines, I'd encourage you to check out that session. Of course, Quickbase Help is always going to be a tremendous resource for you. So we have a specific pipelines help guide that you can find on Quickbase Help. And then lastly, the Quickbase community, something I use all the time. There's so many Quickbase gurus out there. And, pipelines has been out for, over a year now. So there's a wealth of information that people have been sharing within the community. So I'd encourage you to check out Quickbase community to find some of that knowledge out there as well. And I think that wraps up. So the only other resource I want to point out before we jump into questions is if you are on the Quickbase Slack channel and workspace, be sure to check out Empower 2021 session questions. Leanne and I will be there to answer any questions that we don't get to in the next few moments. But thank you.